Hello, it's Ruby, and today I'm going to be telling you the 50 best fiction books that I have ever read. So many people have been asking me to give book recommendations, and I've been planning on filming this video for such a long time, but I just never really got around to doing it. But since it's summer and people have so much more time to read, I thought this would be the perfect time to upload it so that you can maximise the time that you have this summer and actually read some really amazing books. I can tell you now that I loved each of these books because otherwise they would not be on this top 50 list. And I'm just going to give a one-line synopsis for each one so that you have some general idea of what it's about. And I'm also going to be showing the picture of the book on the screen somewhere so you can see the cover. I mean, never judge a book by its cover, but some of these book covers are really lovely. I have done reviews of some of these books on my Goodreads, which is just Ruby Granger. That's always left down below in the description box, so if you'd like to go and have a look at my reviews and see what I think about these books in more detail, then you can head over there. So the first book, and my favourite book of all time, is Cat's Eye by Margaret Atwood, and this is about a woman who is reflecting back on her childhood where she was bullied by her best friend. Then Bullies Like Me by Lindy Zart, which is again about bullying. It's about a girl who has attempted suicide and she is recovering in a psychiatric unit and she's trying to come to terms with what happened. Then, of course, A Little Princess, which I've read every year since I was 6 years old. This is about a girl called Sarah Crew who comes over to Miss Minchin's boarding school from India when her father goes bankrupt. She is forced to work in the boarding school as a servant girl. Then, of course, the Harry Potter series by J.K. Rowling, which I don't really think I need to give a synopsis for. Then two of the Carnegie books from this year. The first one is The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas. This is about a girl called Star who witnesses her friend Khalil being shot by a policeman, and this is basically about police shootings of black people in America. And the other Carnegie book is After the Fire by Will Hill, which is set in a Christian cult in Texas. It's based on a true story, and it follows the story of Moonbeam, who is now in a psychiatric unit after a fire which destroyed the cult, and it's basically written in dialogues between her and her therapist. The next book is We Need to Talk About Kevin by Lionel Shriver, which is about a boy called Kevin who at the age of 15 conducts a high school shooting, and it's told from the mother's point of view, and it follows his childhood and how this potentially impacted the events of the shooting. Room by Emma Donaldson. So this woman has been trapped in this room in this man's backyard for 6 or 7 years, and during that time she has had a son called Jack, and it's basically the story of them and how they eventually are able to leave Room. Then, of course, To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. It's a coming-of-age novel which follows the story of Scout, who is 6 years old at the beginning of the novel, and it's set in Alabama in the 1960s, and it deals with the problem of racism, but most specifically, I would say, the importance of human kindness and the fact that we can never know what's going on in another person's life. The next book on this list is the stunning Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte, which, again, I don't think it's really necessary for me to give a synopsis. I don't really know how to give this book a synopsis, actually. It's harder than I would have thought it would be. The next book on my list is The Perks of Being a Wallflower by Stephen Chbosky. It's a coming-of-age story about Charlie, who is starting high school for the very first time, and he was homeschooled before, and it's him making friends in high school and dealing with his depression. I am wearing, in spirit of this video, my Perks of Being a Wallflower top. If I stand up you can see. It just says, and in that moment I swear we were infinite. I thought it was quite fitting for this video because I knew I was obviously going to include The Perks of Being a Wallflower. Then the next book that I've got on my list is Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. This is about a scientist called Victor Frankenstein who is very isolated and obsessed with, he's very ambitious, he's very driven, and he decides that he wants to create life from nothing. He wants to play God. And he creates this monster, which isn't really a monster, and it's told partially from the captain's view when he picks Frankenstein up, partially from Frankenstein's view, and partially from the monster's point of view. The next book which I have on this list is a children's book, and that is Secrets of Malory Towers by Pamela Cox. So in this Malory Towers book, a new girl, Alice, joins the 6th form, and there's this mystery surrounding her because she's very familiar to all of the girls, but they don't know who she is. That's the side that follows Felicity in the 6th form, and at the same time it's split between the sixth form and the first form, and in the first form you've got Daffy, who is Susan's younger sister, and she has joined and she is just really mischievous, and it's the conflict between Daffy and Violet, who is the least popular in the form. So then next I have put down The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde, which took me ages to get around to reading, and I don't even know why, because it's amazing, but it's about a painting, it's about a portrait that is painted of Dorian Gray, and he looks youthful and beautiful in this photograph. It's ethereal because as Dorian Gray sins, as he does evil actions, the painting is the one that suffered, it's the one that becomes distorted in the facial expressions, and Dorian Gray as a person remains completely flawless. His skin remains as beautiful as it does in the painting. It's just stunning. The next book is The Strange and Beautiful Sorrows of Ava Lavender by Liesl Walton, and this is about a girl called Ava Lavender who was born with angel wings on her back, and she is shut away from the outside world. Next I've got Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close by Jonathan Safran Foer, and this is about a young boy called Oscar Schell who at the age of 9 loses his father in 9/11, and Oscar, after the death of his father, finds this key, and the book is basically his quest to find what this key fits. And Oscar is high-functioning autism. The narration itself is really interesting because of that. My friend Bella and I are basically obsessed with this book. The next book is also about a child who has high-functioning autism, and this is Mockingbird by Catherine Ursine, I think. So this is about a girl called Caitlin whose brother dies in a school shooting, and again it's her trying to come to terms with her grief. The next book on my list is Before I Go to Sleep, which I do have a copy of, but it's actually downstairs at the moment. My friend Ellie recommended this to me. This is about a lady who every day she wakes up and she can't remember anything. So she's got amnesia every morning, and she has to have her memories, her past, explained to her every morning. Then next I've put down What I Was, which is by Meg Rossoff, and this is about a boy at a boarding school, and he keeps on leaving the confines of the school. He finds this cottage where another boy lives, and it's the brewing of their romance together, and it's beautiful. The next book I've got is Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe. This is about the friendship between Aristotle and Dante, two boys who are 15 when they meet, and it's a coming-of-age story. The next book is The Story of an African Farm by Olive Schreiner. It's set in South Africa, and it's a feminist novel. It explores the concept of the new woman, one of the first books to do that. And this Lady Lindell leaves the confines of the farm to go off to school and be educated. The next book I've got down is also set in South Africa actually, which is The Grass is Singing, and this is about an abusive relationship between a husband and wife. The husband and wife are both white, and the wife is really abusive to their black slave. It's horrible, but at the same time it's one of those really important books, and it's beautifully written. Then next I've put on this list Wonder by R.J. Palacio. Everyone knows the story of Wonder, but it's about a boy called Augie Pullman who is born with a facial deformity, which means that he looks very different from other children, and he has never gone to school before, and this is basically his first year in 5th grade. So the next book I've put down is Counting by Sevens, which is about a young precocious girl who loses both of her parents in a car accident, and it's her coming to terms with her grief. This girl is very intelligent. It's actually a bit like Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close and Mockingbird. So the next book I've put down is The Mystery of the Clockwork Sparrow, which is again a middle grade book. And this is basically about a mysterious clockwork sparrow which goes missing from the Sinclair department store. It's kind of a mystery story trying to find out where it went. I really like this because it's set in Victorian London, and it's just very quaint and quintessential. So then next I put down Reconstructing Amelia by Kimberly McCreight. This is told partially from the perspective of the mother, and she finds her daughter Amelia at the bottom of the school building, having fallen off from the top of the building, and it's deemed a suicide, but the mother is convinced that it wasn't a suicide. And so with a detective she investigates the cause of Amelia's death. And as well as it being a really exciting kind of thriller mystery, it's also about female sororities in high school, which is really interesting. The next book is Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine by Gail Honeyman, and this is about a lady called Eleanor who lives alone, and she falls in love with this local musician, and it's basically her attempts to court him, and it's very amusing, but it's also tragic. The next book I've got down here is a series, and this is the Bad Girls Don't Die trilogy. This is a kind of teenage horror series, and I don't usually like books like this, but this is surprisingly good. I really loved this. It's kind of about ghosts, social isolation. It's really difficult to give a synopsis because all three books are very different, but they're a good series. The next book that I've put down is Love, Aubrey by Suzanne LaFleur, and this is a children's book. This is about a girl called Aubrey who loses her dad and her sister in a car accident, and it's just her and her mum left, but then her mum leaves, and so 11-year-old Aubrey is left on her own. And it's, again, a book about grief and her coming to terms with the loss of her father and sister and also mother. The next book is Great Expectations by Charles Dickens, which again doesn't really need a synopsis, but this is about a young boy called Pip. He's born into a working class family, but then he ascends/descends into upper class life. Then of course Atonement by Ian McEwan. A 13-year-old girl witnesses the love affair between her sister and a boy, and it's and then the second half of the book is about the First World War. That was a terrible synopsis, I'm so sorry. Then of course the next book is 1984 by George Orwell, which is this alternate universe where Big Brother is always watching you, and so it's about state surveillance. Leading on from Atonement, actually, this is very similar, which is The Go-Between by L.P. Hartley, which I actually read with school and I really loved it. It's about a boy called Leo who comes to live so he's from a middle-class family. He goes to live at the house of one of his friends from boarding school who is very wealthy, and it's his adventures over the summer as a go-between between Ted, who is a farmer, and Marion, who is his friend's sister, and so it's about the class divide within a marriage, within a loving relationship. And actually the other book that I've put down here is similarly one that I did with school, and that's The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald, and this is about Gatsby and his pursuit for Daisy, his pursuit of the American dream. The next book I've got is Coraline by Neil Gaiman, and this is about a girl called Coraline who is very bored, not very satisfied with her life, but then she goes through this blocked doorway in her house and she finds this other world where she has an other mother and an other father, where they sew buttons into their eyes. It's so brilliant. I think it's better than the film. The next book I've put down is Oliver Twist by Charles Dickens again, and again, synopsis was unnecessary, but Oliver Twist is he's in a workhouse and he travels to London where he meets the Artful Dodger and Fagin. In the first half you've got that there's a lot about pickpocketing. He kind of joins the ranks of this pickpocketing society. The next book is A Monster Calls by Patrick Ness. It's about a boy called Connor whose mother is dying of cancer. He's obviously very anxious about this. He's very preoccupied, and at 3 a.m. every morning a monster comes to his door and tells him a story. The next book is Anne of Green Gables, which is by Lucy Maud Montgomery. This is about a girl called Anne who is adopted by the Cuthberts, and it's her life at Green Gables as she grows up, and this really feisty, lovable character Anne who just has an imagination of gold. The next book is I Am David by Anne Holm. This is set during the Holocaust, and this is about a boy called David who escapes from a concentration camp, I think it's Auschwitz, and he travels to Italy, and there's this beautiful passage where he tries an orange for the first time. The next book is Tinder by Sally Gardner, which is very difficult to give a synopsis of actually, because it's very mystical. This man is in battle and he's given a tinderbox. I read this quite a while ago actually, and I can't think of a synopsis, so I'm just going to read you what it says on Goodreads. So, a young soldier, a captive princess, witches, wolves, and death walk hand in hand in Sally Gardner's exquisitely written new novel, which is inspired by the Hans Christian Andersen fairy tale The Tinderbox. So Otto is tired of war, but when he defies death, he walks a dangerous path. I'm really sorry, but my camera has actually overheated, and so I'm unable to film any more on there. and I'm just going to continue this video. I've only got a few more books left to show you on my phone. I'm really sorry for the camera quality change. The next book is another dystopian novel, and this is Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. This is about a society where books are burnt. It's a crime to own books, and our protagonist is actually part of the firefighter squad which burns these books, but when he picks one up for himself, he becomes part of the resistance. And it's called Fahrenheit 451 because that's the temperature at which books burn. The next book, where is it? Where's my copy gone? The Lovely Bones by Alice Sebold, which is about a girl who at the age of, her name's Susie, and at the age of 14, she is raped and murdered by her, and her body hidden by her neighbour, and it's written from the perspective of a dead person because Susie's writing it after her death and reflecting upon it and looking down at the grief of her family and also the fate of her murderer. Then the next book I've got is Me and Emma by Elizabeth Flock, and this is about a girl called Carrie who feels this need to protect her sister. They both live in an abusive and very poor household. They live a life of neglect and abuse. I know I own a copy of this book, but it's not on my bookshelf, so it must be downstairs. But the next book is The Ocean at the End of the Lane by Neil Gaiman. I love Neil Gaiman's work. So this is about a man who returns to his childhood hometown for a funeral, and he reflects back on his childhood when he was 7, when he met a girl called Letty who had a pond which he called the ocean. In his childhood, a man has just been murdered in his car, and he meets Letty. It's really hard to explain the storyline, but it's very mystical. The next book I've put down is Let the Right One In, which is by a Swedish writer who I can't remember the name of. I can't remember any of these people's names. Ajvide Lindqvist. Sorry, I know I can't say that. But basically this is a vampire story. This is about a boy who is getting bullied, and then he meets this 12-year-old girl in the park and they become friends, but he realises that she is a vampire. I didn't like Twilight, but this book is nothing like Twilight. It's a vampire story, but it's non-comparable. The next book that I've put down is The Distance Between Lost and Found by Catherine Holmes, and this is again about bullying. I do like books about bullying. So it's about this girl who basically refuses to speak. Then they go on this school trip to this nature reserve and they go hiking in the woods, but their group gets lost. The next book is Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier, and this is about Mrs. De Winter who marries Maximus, and but Maximus has an ex-wife who died, and Mrs. De Winter feels as though she is always being compared to this mystical figure of his ex-wife, Rebecca. Then next I have got Howl's Moving Castle by Diana Wynne Jones, and you might have seen the Studio Ghibli movie of this, which is really good as well. And it's so in the land of Ingary, where 7-league boots and cloaks of invisibility really exist, Sophie Hatter attracts the unwelcome attention of the Witch of the Waste, who puts a curse on her. Determined to make the best of things, Sophie travels to the one place where she might get help, the moving castle which hovers on the nearby hills. Gorgeous book. So then the penultimate book which I've got is Peter Pan by J.M. Barrie. Very obvious storyline, but basically the darling children are taken away to Neverland by Peter Pan, and I think this is better than both film versions. And then the very last book which I've got to tell you is Around the World in 80 Days by Jules Verne, and this is about a man who decrees that he is going to travel around the world in 80 days, and it's his adventures along the way. So they are my 50 favourite books, and I know already that I've omitted so many of my favourites, because as I've been going through this video I keep on thinking of other books which I wanted to include, so maybe we'll have a top 100 sometime. But it means that I can include these books in other videos, so I will recommend them at some point. But thank you so much for watching this video. I hope that it's not too long because I've been filming this for maybe 2 hours now, so it has taken quite a while to film. I know I'm going to have to cut a lot down, so thank you again. I hope that you have a productive week.